And so we would like to know what is your work in Sweden.
I work in Sweden with perpetrators that are men that are violent to especially the women but also the kids. And this is my and also working with men with our they are jealous and can't handle their relations, which means that they're coming to a crisis in some way, usually caused by the consequences of their behavior struck back to them. And then they come into a crisis and need some help for the first time of their life, and then they come and see me.
So what type of work do you do with these men in order to, reduce violent behaviors?
Usually we meet them individually or in group. And in group therapy, we usually work with motivation, values, consequences of their behavior, also to distinguish the process to how they become violent, what is it that happens to them, and also to, of course, stop all these aggressive impulses that comes up. You need to handle and control their life in a less destructive way.
Ulf, what's the profile of men who go to your consultation?
Usually it's men that have pretty ordinary life, like they work, they function, they are married, they have kids, but they don't handle their inner life, their emotions, and when they are put on pressure like in the marriage, they usually can't handle it in any good way. They can't solve conflicts in another way. They're being dominated and angry or violent.
Ulf, thinking like I know Sweden and Colombia have very, different context and culture, but what are like your main recommendations if we would, I know it's a huge question, but if we would like to start working with perpetrators here, like what would be your...
Okay, difficult question. How to bring peace to Colombia. I think it involves, the conversation needs to involve all levels in the society. We have to involve both schools, churches, the governmental institutions, all levels, and also to have to start to have the conversation in a way like putting ads on what you can win out of being a more equal man, having, for instance, football players that say, no, I respect my wife, and so on. Because I think men listen to men with higher rank. And that's important, because that's the way the masculinity works. That you just listen to the guy who has the power.
Okay, so another question related to the Colombian conflict is, yesterday they were talking about around 250,000 men who used to be in the war, in either guerrillas or paramilitary groups, and who have left the war and they now, came back to their families. But our question is that these are men, that maybe grew up and lived for a long time in a war context. They're, warriors.
Yeah.
Is there any, like hope for changing all these, war behaviors in them?
I always think it's hope. But it's, of course, there needs to be a crack in the wall somewhere that they share their experience, that they would like to open up in some way. And if you could find a group, they could have some kind of debriefing that they could start to share with other men about what they experienced. I think there is a way of having these men integrated also into the family, because they are very stressed or post-traumatic stress, and they are also very. It's like having a hand grenade. They are without the. They are very dangerous in some way. These men, and I think it's a very important issue to address in some way. But I think that group and sharing their experience is a way of healing, which is important for the men.
We want to ask you, although we know there's not one answer, are these very long or very short processes in your experience?
Yes. I think it's a long it'll take some time. Perhaps it's going to take, there are steps, so it's perhaps some take shorter time, some inner development take longer time. It's different, but it's going to take time. Usually when we see in war zones, we can see that it usually takes generations actually to have the wounds of the war to start to disappear.
Él dice
And that is, if you want to change the masculinity, if you want to change the society, which you want to change men, it's necessary that they find that this is something, that they win something from this change. Because if they can find that I get a better relation, I get closer relation to my kids, they suddenly understand that this way of having an equal relation to my woman is a win-win situation, and that's important.
Él dice que okay. So she's saying that normally what we do is ask people, like, in 20 seconds, if you have a tip for a violent man before he perpetrates an act of violence, what would you say? Like, go walk, sing, have a coffee. Like, in 20 seconds, what would be like?
Read. No, we work with what we call a timeout to stop aggressive impulses and aggressive processes. It's actually a process of fear that you try to escape from the fear of being abandoned or whatever it is, and to stop that process, because your mind is spinning in some way. You have to stop that, and go out for a walk is one thing, breathe is another thing. There are different things for different men, but they need to stop a very negative process. And a very important part here is to show for the man that he is the loser of this process. So he is destructive, not just for the woman, it's also destructive for him. Usually they have to say, oh, sorry, it's not going to happen again, or like this, And all these things makes him into a loser in some way. And to stop this process could be the first time for him that he could actually choose to do something different than just acting out and become destructive.
she's asking if normally men who are perpetrators have fear. They're fearful men.
That's the core of the violence. What we see that like the masculinity or this is just defense mechanism, defense patterns for the fear. The fear of losing control, the fear of not being a man, and fear of whatever it is. Fear of being too dependent and so on. We see a lot of this defense mechanism. And usually we think this is how men are. For example, they have usually very good self-confidence, like this. But on the inside, they are very weak in some way, emotionally unstable, and not all that. The self-esteem is usually pretty bad in some way. So you usually see the outside, the defense of the problem.